Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And today we're talking about this wonderful box, Rudolf Kempe's Richard Strauss Orchestral Works. And the whole box is a reference recording. It's a reference recording because of the excellence of the performances, but also the consistency and uniqueness of the approach, which makes for a Strauss set quite unlike any other. Now, we've talked about some individual Strauss recordings, which served as reference versions. I mean, for example, the Rainer Einheldenleben and the Karajan DG Zarathustra, with the Berlin Phil, the analog one. You know, these are without a doubt reference recordings. They're absolutely marvelous performances of individual works. But one of the beauties of this particular series is that reference recordings can come individually or they can come in clumps. There are reference clumps, and we've talked about some reference clumps before. We talked about the Martinon, Debussy, and Ravel orchestral works. That was a reference clump. Interestingly enough, also on EMI/Warner, as is this, with the Staatskapelle Dresden. But what makes this a reference clump is not just the fact that Kempe is the conductor, although that's a big part of it. It's the fact that the Staatskapelle Dresden is the orchestra. Possibly, I mean, in my mind, definitely the greatest German orchestra of the 20th century. And that includes the Berlin Phil. Folks, I think this orchestra had more character, more panache, more style. See, the Berlin Philharmonic was Karajan's orchestra. It was Karajanized. It sounded the way he wanted it to sound, which was a remarkable thing. He built up that orchestra, and it was an impressive achievement. And then after Karajan left, Abbado took over, and the whole thing went to hell, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they lost much of their character, and they never got it back. They're still an excellent orchestra, don't get me wrong, a fabulous orchestra. But in terms of personality and character, they don't hold a candle to the Staatskapelle Dresden, which had the ironic advantage of being shut away behind the Iron Curtain until the 1980s, 90s, somewhere in there, 1990 or so. And so it evolved its own consistent traditions of performance and of sound. And that sound was as different as could be from the Berlin Philharmonic. It really was. I mean, where the Berlin Philharmonic was all strings and homogenized sonorities and brass that were sort of glued together in a lump, and woodwinds that were sometimes seen and not heard, under Karajan anyway. The Staatskapelle Dresden was much closer to other Central European orchestras like the Czech Philharmonic, orchestras that had very distinctive timbral qualities for each orchestral section, that was enormously transparent in top to bottom sonority, but still with firm, rich basses, excellent strings, characterful woodwinds that you could always hear, and brass that well, they were piercing in the Czech style, with more vibrato and a fruitier timbre, and a lot of differentiation of sound quality between the brass section, the horns and the trumpets and the trombones. They didn't congeal the way the Berlin brass section tended to, under Karajan anyway. And so the Staatskapelle Dresden had very, very special qualities. Now, enter Rudolf Kempe. Kempe was, like Karajan, a chord guy. He was a conductor who was not so much interested in linear contrapuntal motion as he was in realizing all of the vivid colors of the orchestral instruments. I mean, he was an oboist, which goes to show, because he knew that the essence of great orchestration is the treatment of the woodwind section, the wind section generally, including the horns. And so he was always interested in balance, in color. And that's why he did great things like Scheherazade and stuff like that. I mean, he was just a wonderful conductor in music that relied on color and texture to make its primary impression, rather than, contrapuntal dexterity or linear articulation. And I know this sounds rather vague, but if you listen to Kempe Strauss versus Karajan Strauss, you'll hear the huge difference between the two in terms of their handling of color. But they both are doing that. They really are. I mean, they're both interested in the coloristic aspect of the music, but in a totally different way. A totally different way. Karajan was saturated string sound. Kempe was much more balanced toward the wind and the brass sections, with the strings absolutely imperatively important, of course, but in much better balance than Karajan ever offered. And as a consequence of that, his approach to the music was very different. Karajan was dead serious in everything he did. He had no sense of humor at all. Zero. His performance of Ein Heldenleben is absolute goose-stepping. I'm not going to say Nazis. I'm not, but oh, it was heavy and it was grim. This is a cartoon. And it is a cartoon. The piece is a cartoon. It's a parody. That's the whole point of the music. And Kempe gets the parody. He had the humor. And so much of Strauss, people so mistake the kind of composer that Strauss was. Yes, he did all that heavy German stuff. But when I wrote my book on Strauss orchestral works and operas and other things, my listener's guide to Strauss, which was a lot of fun to do, by the way, it was very clear from reading his writings and the things he said about his music himself that he wanted to be the next German Mozart. He wanted to be the great writer of comic opera. Yeah, right. But he did. Whether he was successful or not is another question. It's what he wanted. And he also wanted the humor to be, Till Eulenspiegel, we know it's humorous, right? Supposedly. And the funniest part, of course, as I always say, it's the German sense of humor. It's Till Eulenspiegel's merry trial and happy hanging. Ha ha. But still, the humor is there. And Kempe understood it. And in order to realize that humor, he infused the music with, first of all, real motion. Impulsive motion. These performances move swiftly and inexorably, aided in no small amount by the excellence of the orchestra that can play at that tempo. But also there's this lightness, this transparency of texture, the emphasis on the wind section. It's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So let's go through this 9 discs of Strauss, and a lot of it unusual Strauss, stuff that no one else had recorded or was recording at the time and that you couldn't get anywhere else when this first came out. These were done between 1970 and 1976. And this re-release is from newly discovered original master tapes. Do they sound hugely different from previous CD incarnations? No, not hugely, but marginally better. Yes, they do. It's worth having the latest incarnation of these performances because they're so wonderful. So let's see what's in here, and we'll talk about some of the performances that genuinely are references as well, and some of the novelties and interesting things that we're going to come across, because you've got the late orchestral works too, things that you don't normally hear. All right, first CD. Oh, my goodness, it's 77 minutes. These are very well-filled CDs, by the way. You get Also sprach Zarathustra, good, but it's not as great as Karajan's. It's just in terms of the sonority and the richness, and because the tone poem is basically about nothing, it's just about having a certain sound in your mind. But it's still very good, of course. Death and Transfiguration, first class, swift, exciting, and not crazy in terms of trying to make it a ultra serious. It is serious. You should read the poem that goes with it. It's very serious, but not sententious. Let's put it that way. Okay, maybe that helps. Then we get the Rosenkavalier Waltz Suite and the Capriccio Moonlight music, which is quite lovely. It's an amazing horn solo. Then we've got Till Eulenspiegel. Oh, this is one of the great ones. It's fantastic because of those woodwinds. Amazing. And Don Juan, also one of the great ones. Don Juan works best when it takes not much more than 16 minutes. And this one is my lodestone for that. It's 16 minutes and 15 seconds. It has to just surge forward in a rush. And this is just an amazing performance of Don Juan. And the Ein Heldenleben, which, like I said, it's not as powerful as the Rainer. The playing isn't as self-evidently virtuosic, and that makes the Rainer kind of special, I think. But it's certainly not as heavy and droopy and grim as Karajan's. It's light and it's wonderful, and it's so beautifully paced, and it never outstays its welcome, and it's just terrific. So then we've got the Alpine Symphony. Now, Kempe did a couple Alpine symphonies. He did one with the Royal Philharmonic, which is excellent. It was actually a better sound than this one, but the remastered sound is pretty good, and it's a first-class Alpine Symphony. Again, the pacing is hard to beat. It really is. He just knows how to make the music move. And then we have Metamorphosen, a gorgeous Metamorphosen that lasts 25 minutes, whereas it usually can last 30. It's that swiftness. That's the rhythm, folks. It's a critical component. Then we have a superb Don Quixote. He also did a couple of these. He did one with the Berlin Philharmonic that was on Testament, which is also superb, absolutely superb, with Paul Tortelier cello, Max Rostal viola, and it's terrific. Then we've got the dance suite from harpsichord pieces by Couperin. Now, there are a lot of recordings of that now, but back in the day, this was totally unknown. It's delicious. These orchestrations are wonderful, and the performance is wonderful. Strauss did another one of those suites. He called it a divertimento after Francois Couperin. And he put it all together in a ballet called Verklugene Feste, which is like, something like, dreary celebrations, forgotten celebrations. I don't know. You'll translate it for me. I remember what it was way back when. I don't now. Then we have Aus Italien, which I love. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful work. This is a beautiful performance. Macbeth, also extremely exciting, except that nobody quite matches Jarvi for the crashing tam-tam hysteria at the end. The Staatskapelle Dresden percussion section was a typical German percussion section in the 70s, a little bit dark, a little bit subdued. But Kempe knew when they had to sound, and he always brought them out more or less when they needed to, except for the tam-tam. Damn it. Anyway, Salome's Dance of the Seven Veils, Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme Suite, one of the greatest recordings of that piece you'll ever hear in your life. It's amazingly wonderful. I mean, the orchestra just plays. They're incredibly wonderful. And Kempe delights in every single bar. It's fantastic. Then we've got the waltz from the horrible ballet Schlagobers. Ugh, what a piece of crap that is. Anyway, the waltz is the best part, and there it is. And the symphonic fragment from Joseph's Legenda, The Legend of Joseph, which Strauss also didn't like very much. Another ballet, but it's a heck of a lot better than Schlagobers, and that's nicely done. Nowadays, there are a zillion complete recordings of it, but that's a very nice suite, basically, from the ballet. Then we have the early violin concerto with Ulf Holscher, violin. A lovely performance of that. And the Sinfonia Domestica. Oh, this is a piece that just cries out for the light touch that Kempe has with the work. And it's simply beautiful. Delicious, delightful, lovely. It's wonderful. Then we've got, the Horn Concerti with Peter Dam Horn, the Oboe Concerto with Manfred Clement Oboe, and the Duet Concertino for clarinet, bassoon, and strings with Manfred Weise and Wolfgang Liebscher, wind soloists. Late Strauss, except for the first horn concerto, you may or may not like it. I blow hot and cold when it comes to late Strauss. Some of it is okay. When it's played this nicely and lyrically, it's enjoyable. It can be terribly tedious, but it isn't here. Then we've got the Burlesque in D minor for piano and orchestra with Malcolm Frager, wonderful pianist for, back in the day. And his two piano concerto things, the Paragon from the Sinfonia Domestica and the Panathenaenzug, both for piano left hand. Oh, are they weird? They were both written for Paul Wittgenstein, who declined to play it and probably couldn't because he was a lousy pianist, and these are really, really hard. Peter Rüssel is the pianist of the other two works. I think they're kind of fun. The Panathenaenzug, which means it's symphonic studies in the form of a Passacaglia for piano, left-handed orchestra. Really an amazing piece, 27 minutes long, and it means the All Athens Procession, Panathenaenzug. A really kind of nifty piece. The Paragon from the Sinfonia Domestica is a piece based on the baby theme, da 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 da, ya da 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 da, that thing. And it's a little bit less interesting, I think, than the Panathenaenzug, but what the hell, So there you have it. A lot of Strauss. Strauss that you know, Strauss that you don't know, Strauss that you probably will want to know. And then having known it, you may regret that you know it, or you may be really happy that you know it. It's entirely up to you. The bottom line is the performances are superb. The recordings are lovely. This is a reference set for Strauss orchestral music. No question about it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.